Welcome to episode 2 of Chasing Billy. I'm your host, Cardigan Kid, alias Cardi K, alias James Townsend, also known as Jim Townsend. I changed my Facebook name to Jim on a lark, and I can't change it back for 60 days. So, Jim's fine. My fellow musicians in my band call me Jim, but I typically go by James, and now I'm stuck, according to Facebook rules, as Jim on Facebook for 60 days. So today we spent some time with Doss Boot, fellow board member at Billy the Kid's Historical Coalition, talking about John Middleton, one of the regulators who rode with Billy, and also a little bit about the funeral of John Tunstall and whether Billy was there or if he was in jail during the funeral service or whatever it was that they had on such short and tragic notice. Anyway, before we get into that conversation, I wanted to make a couple points about the show. First off, I'm wearing my glasses today. Some of the feedback I got from the first episode was you look really weird without your glasses, and I agree. I didn't wear them because you can clearly see some glare. You can see some computer lights, the light from my microphone, that kind of thing. But man, I just looked really weird. So we're just going to deal with the glare, I think, because I look smarter, I look more hip, and all around just look better with glasses. So we're going to go with that. Also, second point of order is I committed a most grievous mistake on episode 1, discussing the coalition board members. First off, I spend most of my time talking to fellow board member Ben Doss and directors Jeremiah and Josh Slatton. I refer to them as the brothers Slatton. I, however, failed to acknowledge the work and dedication and presence of board member Mike Morrison. That's just because but just about every day I talk to Jeremiah, Josh, and Doss. I had only met and spoken with Mike Morrison when I had arrived in Texas to attend Old Lincoln Days. I rode with Mike and Josh to Lincoln from Texas and got to know Mike. He's a great guy. He's just wasn't on my short-term memory radar when I was talking about the guys in the coalition. Mike is a extremely valuable aspect of what we do. He does a lot for us. He does a lot of legal legwork, PR legwork, communicating with folks. He contributes to the placement of headstones and all of our projects. But more than that, Mike likes Pearl Jam, and Pearl Jam is one of my favorite bands. So for me to forget to mention Mike was a huge error on my part. And after some group therapy and working through our problems, me and Mike are at least on speaking terms again. Hopefully that relationship will improve. But anyway, I'm wearing glasses now, and Mike Morrison is awesome. Now, on to the show with Ben Doss, infamously known as Doss Boot on Facebook and other platforms. And enjoy the discussion. We talk about a lot of history. We spent about an hour talking about this stuff. So split it up or listen on a long ride. And welcome to episode 2. And we're live. All right. Did you have a countdown on your screen too?
I did. Five,
Yeah.
4, 3. Yeah, I
Yeah.
got it. It was all there, brother.
Cool. Well, cool. Thanks for coming on today.
Yeah, man, of
Why don't
course.
you give folks an introduction? Tell us who you are, what you do, what your passions are, all that kind of good stuff.
Well, on Facebook, I have the moniker of Das Boot, so that's what a lot of people know me as. And I discovered in Lincoln that was,
The infamous Das
yeah,
Boot.
we discovered that in Lincoln it was a name. Oh yeah, yeah, okay, okay. And I was like, but I don't know if it's a good thing that that nobody really calls me by my first name, because there's people that actually just believe that that's my actual name now. So that's kind of funny.
Right, right.
But no, I am, along with yourself, I am one of the board members at Billy the Kid's Historical Coalition. Man, it's almost been 2 years since I joined, and yeah, I work a lot with detailed text. I kind of feel like that has become my forte over the last few years, and built myself up a nice library, and do articles for the website, and put a lot of information out there on the Facebook groups. And
Your work where you had requested those John Middleton letters that he'd written to Tunstall's father,
right,
and your research into those, that's really, I think for me, what cemented his real identity as Jesse Ward Dancer from Texas, because up to that point it had been discussed as a possibility. It had been kind of, implied, but I think really the work that you did on those Middleton letters, putting that together with newspaper articles and the wife's divorce complaint, it really cemented. I think it's basically, we can say with complete certainty that John Middleton's real name was Jesse Ward Dancer, from, I forget the county in Texas that he was from, but we did some good work on that, and you've really solidified that identity for me, so that was really good.
well, yeah, man, and you were such a big help in the beginning. When I came to you, I was like, this is what I've got, and it's a lot of information, and I just need to find a way to kind of get through it. And when we did come to that realization, yeah, it was kind of a big thing. There were a few big things that came out of that research of those letters. One pretty much can solidify that Middleton is not referring to outlaw Jesse Evans from the Boys. He is referring to Jesse
Correct.
Evans from the cattle firm of Hunter and Evans, the same firm that purchased half of Chisholm's cattle in 1878. And man,
Yeah.
those guys had a lot. Those guys had a lot of money and a lot of ranches. And in all those letters, Middleton's letters to J.P. Tunstall, I mean, there's just about 10 in total. I mean, in later letters, like the 7th and 8th letter, he's talking about Jesse Evans by name and what he does, and he loaned him money, and he's like, well, now he's informing me I got to pay him back, and you know what I mean? So he confirms everything too by the location of where the posting of the letters are as well. You know what I mean?
Which
But
is,
he
it's
actually
kind of funny. It's kind of funny and sad at the same time. When you read those letters, you see that most of them are just subtle requests for money from Tunstall's father, especially playing on Tunstall's father's emotions. Your son was
Absolutely.
such a good friend. Yeah, your son was such a good
Yeah.
friend, and he always talked about me, and we were so close. And by the way, if you have any money to spare,
Right. Listen, if anybody needs money more than I could tell you, it's John Middleton. Yeah, what does he say? Nobody's more at the end of their fray than John Middleton. Something along those lines. But yeah, I think the very first letter is the only one that there isn't an immediate reference to money. Something in like the first paragraph about how hard up he is. We do know also that near the end of those letters, he is saying that he's very ill, and that in one of those letters he actually states, I'm very ill, and my friend actually wrote this letter for me. So, and that
wow,
letter would be within that 6 to 8 month time frame before he dies. And we know from that Red River Chronicle newspaper article, the obituary, they died of smallpox. While researching the letters, there were some notes from Mr. Robert Mullen, and Mullen did suggest, which is not completely, crazy at all, but Mullen speculated that smallpox with the combination of the shot in the lungs from Blazer's Mill, which he never
oh yeah,
fully healed from. So if you take the combination of those two ailments, probably safe to assume that the smallpox just kind of, hurried it up a little bit quicker,
yeah,
So, and I agree about you saying that solidifies it, because that divorce petition for her
absolutely,
to
yeah.
name, yeah, for her to name him as Jesse Ward Dancer from Bastrop. It was from Bastrop County. That's where he was from.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean that was
And we know that it was the regulator John Middleton who did travel to Kansas with Henry Brown, who did marry Colcord's sister. All that's documented.
absolutely.
So for the sister to say, yes, this John Middleton, my husband, was Jesse Ward Dancer, is
Yeah.
irrefutably the John Middleton who was a regulator. And it fascinates me that John Middleton and Henry Brown seem kind of to be a pair that left New Mexico at the same time, traveled with each other up to Kansas, and then they split ways
Right.
there. But it's interesting that I don't know how close those two were, or if they just both wanted to get out of Dodge at the same time. But that's an interesting little pair up.
Yeah, and that is an interesting. It is an interesting correlation, and you would think in all those letters there would be some mention of that,
Yeah.
but no, it is his
And
desperate attempt to get money. It's his desperate attempt to
yeah.
get money, absolutely. But he's very descriptive about the wedding. We know that Tunstall sent him $25 as a wedding gift. A lot of people
Wow.
thought that he sent him an actual gift worth $25, but if you the letters, it's very clear he just sent him $25. So I don't know
Very
if that
generous of
means
the old
that-
man.
Yeah, I don't know if that means that it worked, but there is also one other thing in those letters that I believe was in my article, and if it wasn't, then shame on me. But we have
Well,
talked
yeah,
about it
there's
before.
something I want to talk about too, and I wonder if this is it. So I'd like to hear what this issue of yours is that you want to talk about.
In one of the letters to J.P. Tunstall Middleton. Now, whether he's telling the truth or not, who knows? But it is interesting. He says that lawyer Alexander McSween gave me a promissory note of $500 against John Tunstall's estate, but I lost it. He says I have misplaced it. So, would that indicate a $500 payment for his acts in the Lincoln County War? I don't know,
Right.
but I think that's very, very telling to at least speculate on it quite a bit. But I don't
Yeah,
know.
and
I
wasn't
don't
the
know.
rate? Couldn't the rate have been something like $5 a day, or so much, some kind of contract like that for the kind of a
Yeah.
hired gun sense for a lot of these
Right.
regulators?
Right, and you remember too that and the day that Tunstall was killed, 30 or so hired gunmen were gathered up at McSween's house because Tunstall had told them to be there. You know, he was
Yeah.
going to hire these, and I believe it is documented somewhere in a McSween letter that somewhere, or Weidman, might have been Weidman, Wiedemann, whatever, that I believe it equaled out to like $4 or $5 a day, something like that. I believe
Yeah.
there is a documented digit out there that does state that.
That's good work for a gunman. A good day's work.
Yeah,
There's
and-
also, I think, does Jim French mention that in that possibly authentic letter that they have from Kiowa,
yeah,
where he talks about watching McSween's house and the bobcat or something like that jumps over them.
Yes, you're correct, and he does mention that. It's been a while since I've viewed that letter, but
Me too. Yeah.
I believe you are correct. There is at least two documented statements from two different regulators that have something about a note. I mean, but the fact that Middleton mentions $500 against Tunstall's estate to me makes sense
Right.
because what was McSween? What was he giving him? He had no money. The money smoke train was coming from England. You know what I mean?
Right.
So,
Yeah. Absolutely.
so Tunstall gets murdered, and you're like, oh, what do I do? And that's why I think that there's enough to also speculate whether or not Chisholm truly was involved as in depth as people like to say. I think it's just as safe to say that McSween bartered with Chisholm's name. I think that is also a possibility. Is that a fact? No, but I think it's safe to say that, McSween could have been like, listen, I'll pay you this much. You know what I mean? When, Chisholm will do this, Chisholm will do that. But we also have Middleton's letter to Sam Corbett that says, "Old John has gone back on us." And
Right.
yeah, there's that one little line about after, the murder of Brady, and they left town for a little bit, and after Roberts was killed, that letter paints another picture. It's kind of like, well, Middleton's throwing Chisholm's name out there, and he definitely was involved. I mean, Middleton was involved in so many events, I also think I think if he hadn't taken that shot in the lungs at Blazers Mill, I think he probably would have played a more important role, because we do know that Middleton is described by Tunstall to his father in those letters. He's one of the first ones he describes, him and Brewer. And there's a few other documentations as well that Middleton apparently was quite the gunsmith, and definitely was
and given
someone. Yeah.
Given how few men Tunstall talked about in letters to his family, the fact that he brought up Middleton probably meant he had a pretty prominent position among the regulators. One thing from Middleton's letters that struck me as very interesting was his attitude towards Billy, the kid, when he said Bonney has gone traitor on us. So he writes. So what I'm wondering is, do you think that Middleton heard from maybe Sam Corbett or somebody else that Bonney had been arrested and was working with Wallace for that pardon to testify against Jesse Evans, but from an outsider's perspective who didn't know about the dealing with Wallace and things like that, did it look to Middleton like Bonney made peace with Jesse Evans and the Murphy faction and was playing into their hands? What do you think his mindset was to call Bonney a traitor?
Well, I think the thing about that is definitely because you got to remember, in that correspondence, when Middleton mentions that letter specifically that we're talking about, and he says, Billy Bonney, he's talking to J.P. Tunstall, Billy Bonney was with us in the canyon when your son was killed. Billy was with us up until the last moment, whatever. But he goes, if rumors are true, then money has won him over. In the letter, Middleton also mentions about Billy being the prime witness against Evans, Dolan, and Billy Campbell. That's pretty interesting that he would out him as being that prime witness when Billy had to go through quite a bit with Wallace in order to keep that, the sham arrest, everything to do the testimony. And I don't know. But I think Middleton's in Kansas, remember? So he could be getting that information from another letter, which in that letter he does reference where that information came from. And I do believe it was D.P. Shields. I do believe it was Shields.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah, it would make sense actually. So I'd have to look at it again, but I've read those letters so many times, and I believe it is. I'm 90% sure it's D.P. Shields, and so he is referencing, of course, the armistice between Dolan, Evans. Billy Matthews was there. A few other people that were there, and Billy is like, hey, it really seemed like. All the documented evidence, the text that we have, and even all the stuff that's been really scrutinized, I don't really think Billy wanted anything else other than to get people off of his back at that point. He's running from soldiers. He's running from Dolan's faction. He wanted really to put that to an end. That's how it really looks, because you got to think it's quite daring and quite ballsy of him to ride into Lincoln during the time that he rides into Lincoln to do this. I mean, at that time, Brady's been killed. They're not really looked upon as likable. They didn't really have that many supporters. So I think that says a lot that he was willing to go to their terms and their ground. Like, hey, let's meet right here and let's talk. And then we have... So that's the reference, as Middleton's talking about, okay, so they get together, and maybe it's just because Dolan was involved that Middleton would go to the extent of saying that Bonney and the others accepted money. But but we've never...
It's a confusing armistice from the perspective of Middleton or anybody else. If you trust the sources that say, like George Coe, who said he saw Billy say, I'll get every one of them that killed Tunstall. And I believe Coe was the one who said when they were departing Lincoln County and tried to get Billy to join them, Billy said, I'm going to stay here, I'm going to steal myself a living, and I'm going to kill every one of the people involved with Tunstall's. So if John Middleton is aware of this, if that was a true sentiment of Billy's, which that can be questioned, because I take a lot of what George Coe and Frank Coe say with a grain of salt, because
Absolutely.
it gets into the old-timer tales once you get to the 20s and 30s. But that is a confusing armistice, because you've got this kid who's just hell-bent on a blood feud and getting revenge or making things right, all of a sudden making peace with the Dolan crew. And I can see how Middleton could be confused by that and call Bonney a traitor. That's an interesting perspective, and I'm glad we have that letter to see kind of the dynamics of those guys, because Billy's still alive at the time Middleton's writing this, and it's all still going on, which is fascinating.
Absolutely.
It's not something.
Absolutely.
It's not
Billy's
a recollection.
Yeah.
It's not a recollection.
Yeah.
It's not. It's like, hey, this is going on now. Bonnie's turned traitor. He's been bought off, or things like that. Very interesting stuff.
And there's another line. There's another line in that paragraph too, where it says, and Middleton says, "And if this is true about him accepting money, I shall never have confidence in him again." Well, and one of the things I wrote in my article, I'm like, well, that's an interesting statement, because it probably suggests at one point he had a lot of confidence in Billy. And one of the things I made and point in my article, there isn't any other reference to say that Billy isn't the one who planned the escape from the McSween house. You know what I mean? And did it go exactly as planned? No. But if he hadn't have probably made those quick-minded decisions in those last moments, would they have all had died? Would all of them been gunned down? I don't know. But for Middleton to suggest, like, I'm never going to have confidence in him again, I feel like at some point Middleton may have looked at him a little bit more strongly. But it could just be Dolan's name attached to it, Evan's name attached to it, that Middleton would make that conclusion. But remember, in the postscript, what did Middleton say in the PS to J.P. Tunstall? He said, in the postscript, it says, when writing to any of the boys, please do not mention me talking about Bonney as a renegade. It might bring me into trouble. It says it might bring me into trouble again. So that also is telling, because he knows Billy is still alive. So you're right. What are the chances Middleton's be like, man, if this letter gets out, or I'm telling all this stuff to J.P. Tunstall, which a good point that I wanted to really get across in the article is, why is Middleton mentioning Billy Bonney in the first place? Because we know that John Tunstall never mentioned Billy in the letters. He wasn't a mentor. He wasn't this, father figure. We have got that pretty much well tightened down. Billy was with Tunstall for about 10 weeks before he died. And Tunstall was busy with quite a lot of impeccable business matters that were, kind of encroaching on his life. And so I just, there's no really way to make that connection about Billy and the Tunstall, about I'm going to get some of them before he dies. I was remembering that in West of Billy the Kid, Nolan has that credited to Frank Coe saying that. I think Coe said it, Frank said it as well, right?
Yeah.
But there is one very including detail that we could go into thing about the funeral of John Tunstall as well. I think a lot of people confuse that was Billy's at the funeral and he's saying this over the coffin. But that's not the case. In West of Billy the Kid, Frank Coe says that Billy says this over Tunstall's embalmed body.
Well, you mentioned the embalming of Tunstall's body.
Yeah.
And you talked about the funeral in McSween's home. So I don't think I've ever realized that those could have been spaced out. So Billy, the embalming would have taken place shortly after Tunstall's body was brought there?
Yeah. So the embalming would have taken place on the 20th. And that is according to the Angel. That's according to the Angel report itself. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there's the dates of this stuff. Man, I have gone through the prime sources, those 5 main big, head honcho historians. So, I went to Nolan, Utley, Fulton, John P. Wilson. I went to all of them. And these dates are just, they vary. And a lot of the big question, one of the things that we were going to, kind of get on the topic today, because it is something that just seems to be pretty well regarded as a fact, that Billy was not present for Tunstall's funeral because he was arrested the day before with Fred Waite and Constable Atanasio Martinez. Okay? Now, here's what's interesting. Without a doubt, Frederick Nolan was the premier historian when it comes to Frederick Nolan. And I say that because he's the only one that put out the biography, and that book, the pictures alone in that book are amazing. I mean, he's got a copy of Tunstall's boarding pass from Lincoln, from London when he came over, right?
So you're talking about the Tunstall book, Nolan's Tunstall
book. The Life and Death of John Henry Tunstall, published in 1965. In that book, Nolan puts Tunstall's pallbearers as Frank and George Crow, Dick Brewer, Billy Bonney. The footnotes in the back of Tunstall's Life and Death of John Henry Tunstall for that source, Nolan legitimately states in that note, this is based off George Coe's widely inaccurate timeline. Okay? Yeah. So, that's 1965. Fast forward 1998, over 30 years later, west of Billy the Kid, without a doubt, one of his opus books, for sure. Okay? One of the best reference books out there. By 1998, he legitimately states that Billy was arrested and was therefore prevented from attending John Tunstall's funeral. So by 1998, he removes him. Okay? So that's interesting. We do know that Mary Ely, the wife of Dr. Taylor Ely, states that she played the organ, and standing right next to her was Billy the Kid and his cowboy friends armed to the teeth. Okay?
Yes, and I believe she said Billy had a nice singing voice, right?
Yes, she did. He's singing with a very soft tenor. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, here's the problem. That is what anybody would say. That's a first-hand account. Okay? Well, she definitely was there. Okay? But here's the problem for me, when you really dissect it a little. The source of her saying that comes from an undated letter to Maurice Garland Fulton. It is not a documentation that happened on the day of the funeral, a month after the funeral, nothing like that. In an undated letter. Okay? That letter is in the Herman Weisner collection at NMSU. Okay? I've seen the letter. There is no date. But if it's to Maurice Garland Fulton, then it puts it into an interesting timeline because of when his main bulk of work was. Right. So, the problem with that, to me, is that she calls him Billy the Kid. Okay? Mm-hmm. That right there, basically, to me, gives that date probably 1920 or past. Somewhere in there, that letter to Fulton. In Reverend Dr. Taylor Ely's diary, in there, he doesn't actually state the pallbearers or whoever. He states that Serbian Bates is the one who dug the grave. We know that. He said it was interpreted in Spanish by John B. Wilson. He gives those names. He does not give any names of regulators at all. Okay? We also have Alexander McSween's letter to J.P. Tunstall, February 23rd, 1878, where he says that McSween tells Tunstall's father that he dressed the body himself, remember, and put it in the coffin. Then the coffin was closed and carried out by pallbearers Frank and George Coe, John Newcomb, Dick Brewer.
Well,
So
yeah,
McSween is definitely there, and McSween does not place Billy there.
And that's a much more dated source because McSween can only go as late as 1878.
Yep. He can only go a few more months past that time. So February 23rd is one day after the funeral, which was February 22nd. Now, here's the thing again. Here's the thing about Nolan's. I know he's not the only one, but man, that book has got so much in it, and that's where I started. He also states in there, he refutes Dr. Ely's diary entry that the funeral was on the 21st. In his John Tunstall book, Nolan refutes it and says, no, it was February 22nd, not the 21st. But get this, by west of Billy the Kid, even though he has removed Billy from the funeral in this book and says, nope, he was arrested by Brady, that whole incident, he's not there. In the footnotes, in the back of west of Billy the Kid, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, Tunstall states that the date of Tunstall's funeral has always been a contention. And he says that Dr. Taylor Ely states it as the 21st and the 22nd, which Ely actually does in two different entries, states it as the 21st on one, and another paragraph on another entry when talking about it states it as February 22nd, 1878. So again, it gets confusing a little bit because of the dates, right? So whether Billy is at that funeral or not rests just as much on importance of the date of Tunstall's funeral. So Tunstall, in those notes in West of Billy the Kid, states that after mature reflection, and I imagine after 30 years of researching more, he says that he is to conclude that it took place on February 21st. So he goes from February 22nd in 1965, and then in 1998, he refutes and goes back to February 21st as the date of the funeral. However, the incident where Billy is arrested with Fred Waite and Constable Martinez, there is no source that disputes the fact that that absolutely happened on February 20th. Okay? Then we know that Martinez was let out.
What are our sources for that arrest? Are there contemporary sources? Are there arrest records or anything to just irrevocably or irrefutably say this is the day they were arrested?
As far as I've never actually, seen one like an actual authentic county arrest record or anything. I wish I could get my hands like that if something exists. But every source that states that he was arrested by Brady on the 20th says that, Martinez was let out shortly after, but Waite and Billy were kept for at least 24 hours. So all the sources
in the pit jail.
It doesn't actually say pit jail, but that's the only place they would have been kept at the time. I mean, there's no courthouse, but none of the sources do say they were put in the pit jail. I don't see that in any of them. Not Nolan's, nobody. I mean, Utley, in both of Utley's books, High Noon and Lincoln, Short and Violent Life, he just kind of skates right over it in a way. Utley does state that they were released on the 21st, and Utley does state that the funeral took place on the 22nd. He just does not, by name, place Billy at the funeral. He just states that he was released after at least 24 hours. And I haven't found one that disputes that. All of them say at least 24 hours. However, the deposition in the Angel report says that Billy was kept for 30 hours.
30 hours. It's a long time to be in that pit jail.
That comes from the Angel report. And is that is that hey, that's the mother-all? I mean, that is some legit documentation with statements from just about anybody that, involved that you could think of. Also, in the Angel report, the report itself, David G. Thomas's book, the Frank Angel Report on the Death of John Tunstall, states the funeral as February 22nd, 1878.
Right.
Which, if that is the date...
Josh, from the Coalition, one of our supreme leaders, Josh Slatton, shared this image with me, the pit jail, which I think is a pretty cool showing of, a lot of times it's hard for me to picture what that would have looked like. And this is actually one of the first illustrations I'd seen of how it would have been set up. I thought this was pretty cool. So Bonney would have spent about 30 hours down there in that dark, cramped area.
Where did this sketch come from?
That we're going to have to ask Josh. I asked him to come on the show, and he said he hated this show and didn't want to be a part of it, and fired me from the Coalition. So
I've
we're
been
going to have
wondering.
to
He's been
make peace.
Yeah,
there was a schism. I'm going to have to somehow bring a peace offering, see if we can get him back. But he just said he was too cool for this kind of thing.
Yeah, he's tiptoeing on this, imbalance of just like, I'm a little too cool for things, and I just have to find other ways to word it.
Yeah,
no,
hey,
that's
look,
a cool
if he
image.
ain't here, we can talk all we want about him.
Absolutely. That's why there's editing. That's cool because there is no existent photos of it, just a description, you know what I mean? But we do know that the pit jail did exist because George Pepin was contracted to build it. There's even a contract and price and everything that he built it. There was a contract price. I believe it was $3,500 was what he was paid to build that thing.
Right, and in all seriousness, I don't think he was able to join us at this time, and I know he would have been able to tell us a lot more about some of this stuff in terms of the pictures he shared. But I will share something else he sent me that I believe is probably a photo of his about where the jail location is today and what that looks like, which was also pretty cool. I've got it right here. Let me know when you see it. It's loading up there. So it looks to be just a field now. And I don't know if that, patch of dirt next to the pile of lumber would be where the pit jail was or where. But that area there in Lincoln is how it would look today or in the recent past.
Okay.
So that's
well, and and that is a big thing. And we're talking about this, was Billy at Tunstall's funeral? Well, I mean, look at this, this constant just, well, was it this date or is it that date? But it isn't really broad. It is very narrow. It either happened on the 21st or it happened on the 22nd. But if he's in jail for at least 30 hours, if we go by an actual government documentation of the Angel Report, he's in there for 30 hours. If he's arrested on the early morning hours of the 20th, I believe in one of the sources I was able to, John P. Wilson's book, Merchants, Guns, and Money. That book, he says that the funeral took place approximately 9 o'clock in the morning. Okay, so we've got a date. You could probably, we could assume that he's there. But the Mary Ely thing, like I said, well, hey, that's the person that's saying that Billy the Kid was right there singing while she played on the organ. It is important to note that in McSween's letter to J.P. Tunstall, he says, the organ is peeling off sad notes. So that would tell me that there is an organ there. It's in the McSween house, right? She's probably playing. He doesn't say that it's Miss Ely playing it, but we would just assume because Miss Susan McSween was not there. She was absent at that time. So most likely Mary Ely is playing an organ, if there's an organ playing. If McSween's writing a letter literally the day after the funeral, putting that to me right there would be the closest thing. And if Mary Ely, talking about sources, primary sources of as close to the event from someone who witnessed it. And Dr. Taylor Ely is the one who, does the service, so he's there, but of course doesn't give those names. And to me, that makes perfect sense that he wouldn't give those names, because remember, the Elys literally arrived 2 days prior in Lincoln.
Sure, yeah.
Why would they know any of these people? Why would they know them? That's why she refers to him as Billy the Kid, because the letter came much later, I would imagine, especially if it was, to Fulton. And so whether or not that's a legit source, will automatically be like, well, yeah, she's Ely's wife. She was there. But I find firsthand accounts a little bit more credible when I see W.M. Bonney, Billy Bonney, William Bonney. When they refer to him as Billy the Kid, they're referring to the
legend,
glamorous alias that you can think of that everyone's going to refer to. So the fact that she refers to him as Billy the Kid, well, that did not come documented during the funeral, because he didn't have that moniker for another 2 years after. So, so is she a credible source to place him there, or is Alexander McSween the most credible source to place him there, which he does not place him there? But he also just names the pallbearers. That doesn't mean Billy couldn't have been there. McSween just said, "Here's the people who carried the coffin out."
So do you think Billy was at the funeral, or do you think he was still incarcerated?
I don't see. Okay, so if the event where him and Fred Waite and Constable Martinez are arrested, if it does absolutely happen on the 20th, and the funeral's on the 21st, 30 hours, it would be tough if we're just speculating on those dates. If it is on the 22nd, I don't see any reason at all why he wouldn't be there. It doesn't mean that he had to be a pallbearer. I mean, we know how small he was. It wasn't like, hey, muscles, come over here and lift this coffin. Lift this metal coffin, because he was buried in a metal coffin. So, I mean, that could be just as easily explained, like you said. The dates, memories, everything kind of just collides into one. That very well could be it. It also just could be about historians going, well, man, here's the sources I've got to pick from, and they're not exactly sure themselves. So I'm going to run with the source that I believe and stick with it,
Right. Yeah.
So if the funeral happens on the 22nd, I don't see any reason why Billy would be there, because if he's not in the jail, then he's got to be at the funeral. And if he's not in the funeral, then you would think he's in the jail. He's got to be in jail. Right. But also remember the big store raid where Weidman has the soldiers that he got from Captain Purington. That store raid on Tunstall store where they arrested everybody in there, Brady's, men, disarmed them, all that stuff. That was on February 23rd, and Billy Bonney was present. So you have to take that in consideration. Either way. And Brady got him for the rioting charge along with, 10 others. So he's there February 23rd. There doesn't seem to be any debate about that date happening on February 23rd either. That event definitely took place on that day. So really it's about when Tunstall's funeral took place and whether or not you believe Mary Ely saying that he was there. And then you have Franco saying, well, he did say, I'm going to kill as many of them as I can. But Frank says this was at the embalming, not the actual funeral. Right. So I think it's really, like I said, will we know? I don't know. It's one of these ones where I guess I could just agree with a lot of those comments that we see in groups sometimes. We're just never going to know, because if I could find an arrest record, a county record, something like that would place him there for sure. But there isn't. I don't have any doubt that him being arrested with Fred Waite and Martinez, I don't doubt that event happened. I believe it absolutely happened. There's too much evidence to suggest that it did, compared to saying that it didn't happen. It's just way too much. Right.
It's just such a slim window between February 19th and the 22nd, that small window of time that we're not sure yet. And barring the introduction of more solid evidence, we're just going to have to take a informed position one way or the other, and allow for a little murkiness. But anyway, man, thanks for hanging out. This was a good chat.
Absolutely, brother. Anytime you want me to come back on, have another chat, I'm down.